So we were going to have the opponents have representatives, and we are not going to do that now. So I hope everybody heard that. That's online. Is that if you're not an actual candidate, we're not going to have you speak because we didn't have enough time to get consent to everyone. There are people that through their schedules were not able to make it today, but we still thought it was important to have the conversation today. And this is meant to be, well, this is against bridge principles, but we usually don't talk about what things aren't, but this is not a debate, right? So this is not meant to be that type of a space. This is a space where we're going to have discussion. We're all going to practice civility and also sort of appreciative inquiry is how we're going to approach the conversation around race equity today, asking questions to give us more of the information that we need. Does that make sense? So we're not doing that traditional debate. There are debates and we can get you those dates at the end of this. There are 2 or 3 more opportunities for debates, if that makes sense. These questions that our race task force has put together will be distributed. The candidates got them today and there are some answers and we will make sure if you sign in with Stephanie, we'll make sure that you get the written responses from everyone. Does that work for everybody? I think Sonali is our staff member that's supporting JV and taking care of everybody online. We're glad you're here. I'm not ignoring you, but I'm going to be focused on the people in here. And Sonali and JV will tend to integrating the folks online. So what else do I want to say? My name is Gwendolyn Van Sant, if you don't know me, and I'm the CEO and founding director of Bridge. And we were involved in the campaign for DA a few years ago. And we weren't a part of the What a Difference a DA Makes, but we were inspired by that work in Connecticut and since engaged with What a Difference a DA Makes throughout the last few years. But our representative at the ACLU ended up running for DA himself. So that kind of ended. But we had been doing work in partnership with What a Dam for the last few years. So know that this work is informed by our race task force exploring and following our current DA. Also on the race task force, we've always been involved in law enforcement and public safety. When we started 12, 14 years ago, Chief Wynn was one of our, of Pittsfield was one of our inaugural members, and he stayed with us until he became an active chief in Pittsfield. And we also partnered with the Department of Justice and other public safety. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to have the sheriff and the DA candidates together. So tonight, who we have with us are Andrea Harrington, DA Harrington in person, and we also have Alf as a candidate for sheriff position online. And then we do have Lindsay from the sheriff's office who can speak to particular questions that are targeted at the work that she does now. So those are the representatives that we have. We had, like I said, a plan that was coming into fruition today, but we didn't get consent from everyone. So the folks that are not here, we will just send you their answers to these questions. Does that work for everybody? Okay. So our goals today are really to support the voting residents in our county in thinking through their voting decisions. We really want to keep the conversation going in the sense of accountability. Really to historical and current issues in law enforcement and public safety in Berkshire County. We want to create accessibility to our candidates for Southern Berkshire. That was one of the calls to action for this particular event. Originally, Hebra had invited us to host this event, but we weren't able to do it on the dates. Our dates didn't match up, so we're grateful to Berkshire South for hosting us. We want to, again, like I said, provide a civil format that holds space for multiple perspectives on leadership and law enforcement. So that our voting residents can make informed decisions, as I said. And then we also want you to really get a taste of Bridge's organizing agenda and our approach to work. So that hopefully that is a part of what comes out today. I will be your moderator. The candidates have had the questions to look them over. We will try to keep the original answers to 90 seconds, and then we can ask follow-ups as we need to. Again, for the hybrid session, Sonali and JV will be monitoring. People are muted and will raise their hands when we have the open format time. And they'll also submit their questions that Sonali will feed to JV really worked well. We'll sort through and ask the questions that need to be presented. And the rules for our candidates. So on the screen in here is that we are not trashing other opponents. We can look and see what everybody's done, right? What we want to hear now is what people stand for that are in this space. It's an opportunity to really hear from the leadership of the candidates. So we're not doing the trash the opponent game here. So is that good? Does that make sense to everybody? Sounds good. All right, so I think I said about how we got here. So just, I need everybody to be really clear. It's pandemic time, so that's affected some people's presence here, and it's also a busy time. But so who's here and who's not here doesn't indicate Bridge's support of any particular candidate. As a nonprofit, we can't do that. So I want people to be clear about that, right? As a nonprofit, we are holding space for all candidates equally. And then I want to explain what our race analysis is, and then we'll get into it. So Bridge has been operating with a race equity analysis for 4 years. What that is we ask people to think about racial justice in 4 areas. The first is internally. So what we each individually bring to the table, what our biases are. So we're looking around this room, right? And we're seeing that there are a lot of white people here. And I think online from the names I recognize, there are a few folks of color online. So individually, what does that mean that you bring to this conversation? And really thinking through that lens and listening through those ears is really important, and being aware that that's what you're doing, right? So that's the internal work that we all bring to racial justice work. The second is interpersonal. What relationships do we have, right? This is a race equity forum. Where are your friends of color? Where's your community of color that you could have brought to this forum? Those are questions that you should carry forward, right? So we're holding our candidates accountable, but all of us are held accountable to our relationships and who we're in relationship to, right? And then the third area is culture. Culture is about what norms and attitudes and behaviors prevail, right? And that's really, really important that we're able to unpack what we identify at Bridge as white supremacy norms. In our country, we adhere to white middle class norms as the average and what's right? And then when we live in a predominantly white area like Berkshire County, that's reinforced all the time, right? So just being aware of that's the water that we're all swimming in, that's the water we've been raised in, educated in, we have to work in, and what is that like? So that's the analysis that we ask you to bring. And then I think on this institutional level, the 4th level of our analysis is where we're going to spend time today, right? About policies, right? And practices and laws, and how that's impacting people's lives. And so that's the race equity conversation that we're focused on here, but we have to go through all those other levels to get to an effective conversation about that. Does that make sense to everyone? So that's the work that we do at Bridge all the time in our daily programming and our work with our clients and our work with our youth. And so we invite you all to be doing that work in your seats as we're holding our candidates accountable to this race equity and justice conversation. Good. All right. Everybody good online? Is that good? So the first question that we have here, there's a set of questions for all candidates, and then there's a set of questions for Andrea, a set for Alf, and then we'll get into community questions, and then we'll wrap up with the closing questions. So the first question I have for Andrea, and we'll try to keep this to 2 minutes. Sure. Can I ask Carolina at this time?
Just here.
Louder? Okay.
Can we use the microphone?
Yeah.
Is it turned on?
You're speaking. You turn it off as you talk. Yeah.
That's my habit. I know. Thank you. I will work at projecting. All right.
Thank you.
Keep reminding me. What? We didn't think we did it. Oh, that sounded like. All right, well, maybe we can see if we can get someone to help us. But I'm going to start. That's it. If you can ask us to repeat, but the first question, do you mind having time, Karen? So 2 minutes. Okay. Thank you so much. So Andrea, how do you understand the DA's role in advancing racial justice? Speaking from your experience over the last 4 years of what's happened and what you thought it would be and what it turned out to be.
Well, I see the DA's role in advancing racial justice as being multifaceted. What I found over the last 3.5 years is that I can have the biggest impact on the things that my office controls, the kinds of decisions that we make, the way we use our prosecutorial discretion. And what I found is that I want to lead by example, because addressing the scourge of racial disparities that we see across the criminal legal system actually really very much requires all of the different pieces of the system to be in alignment and to be working towards the same goal. But I really have found that as the district attorney's office, we can lead by example. And I believe that we lead by a very powerful example in interrogating the way that prosecutors, analyze our cases, in the way that we prosecute our cases. So the first, there's a study done by Harvard. We know that there are racial disparities. We know that prosecutors contribute to those racial disparities. We partner with the Wilson Center at Duke University to look at our pleas and the way that we handle our pleas. We are doing an in-depth study with them. This is the first study of its kind. And they're going to help us by making actual recommendations as to how do we limit the role of prosecutors in causing racial disparities, and how do we use the role of prosecutors to advance racial equity. I'm the top law enforcement officer in the county, and we bring this attitude back to our law enforcement partners. We see police reports where there's questionable traffic stops. We bring those back to the police chiefs. We're continuing to do the work and to give them, in a feedback loop, like, we cannot justify this stop. We cannot prosecute this case. We've also worked with Judge Tina Page, who's a retired Superior Court judge, and she's taught us about how we read our police reports, looking for racially coded language. We consider race, and we consider the systemic oppressive pieces that exist throughout the system and throughout society in analyzing our police reports.
Thank you. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn to Alf. What is your vision of advancing racial justice work in the Sheriff Department? Uh-oh, you need your sound.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Gwendolyn, good evening. How are you doing?
Hi, good evening.
Good. First of all, thank you for allowing me to dial in remotely. My plan was to be there in person. However, we've had a tough 4 or 5 days here. My wife and my twin babies, or our twin babies, are all positive for COVID. Some scary last 72 hours with the babies for sure. So even though I tested negative today, appreciate you allowing for this so I could spend a little more time at home. So can you rephrase the question? Unfortunately, I haven't seen any of these questions, so this will be a little bit off of the cuff.
Oh, I'm sorry. So maybe Sonali can email them to you while we're talking, but this is, how do you see the Sheriff's Office advancing racial justice work?
Advancing racial justice?
Work, yep.
Racial justice work, very good. Yeah, the audio's a little teeny tough. So that's pretty basic from my position. As Andrea stated, she's the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the county, and on the front end, she has a lot more to deal with. But regarding sheriff's operations, pretty much two front. One, if you're an inmate or detainee, male or female, at that institution, you will be treated fairly and equitably, regardless of race, gender. So that's first and primary with our team. Secondly, if you're an employee at that office, you're going to be treated equitably as well regarding any race factor. So that can be being hired right out of the gate, and it could also be for promotional opportunities. At this point, we have some issues with some of the promotional advancements there, and we have a plan about how we will change that to be more inclusive, basically representing the rank and file members and also the community at large. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the next question is if you could elaborate a little bit on the responsibilities, accountability, and commitment of your office, and really thinking about from the race equity lens, but also the intersection of gender and class. So really, you know, I think you both spoke broadly, but we're looking to kind of get our teeth into details today, right? So what does it look like, you know, race equity in the daily work, you know, as far as accountability goes?
Yeah, so we started a racial justice group in the office that is led by Judge Tina Page. And the group, first, what they did a survey of all of the prosecutors to ask, you know, do you, when you read police reports, do you first look at the race of the defendant before you read the police report, or do you wait? And we had a really robust office-wide discussion about what that means. And, you know, where we came out was that it is important for us when we're reading our police reports to have in mind, you know, what the people's race and their gender is of the defendant, because we believe that, you know, there's actions of people depending on their race or their gender can be reported and perceived differently by witnesses. We think it's important for prosecutors to understand that. That's just a small example of how we use a racial justice lens. Right. We also have done a lot of work around serving victims and, you know, what we kind of consider to be vulnerable victims. So vulnerable victims include Black and brown people, immigrants, people that have been historically oppressed by the criminal legal system, by law enforcement. And we put a lot of effort into how do we build relationships with vulnerable groups so that they feel safe and confident coming to law enforcement and reporting crimes. A big way that we've done that is really by diversifying the staff. It's huge when you know, when I'm having a meeting with a victim and they walk into the room and they see somebody that they relate to, somebody that they feel like shares their life experience, it really creates trust just right away. We've also done a lot of work around how we address the needs of LGBTQ victims. We have changed our questionnaires when we question victims about their safety to reflect that LGBTQ relationships. We've changed our language so that we're gender affirming. And I think that we've set a really positive example across the system for how we relate to people who are, you know, experiencing that intersectionality.
Thank you. And so Alf, I hope you heard that question. You got a little bit into brass tacks when you talked about hiring, but just how would you see race equity intersecting with class and gender in practical terms in your office?
Is this a question you sent to me already?
So I hope that my team was able to get to your team the questions for today. If not, we've asked Sonali to email them to you, and this is the second question. Yes.
And the question, can you rephrase the question? Because I just had someone send me something. I'm not seeing this at all.
What does race equity mean to you on a daily basis in your responsibilities, accountability, and commitment? Please elaborate to include where you see and experience the intersection of gender, gender identity, and poverty issues.
Okay, yeah, so this is just off the cuff, obviously. So yeah, I mean, bottom line is statistics tell us over and over, minorities are disproportionately prosecuted and incarcerated. Unfortunately, that's not unique to Berkshire County or Pittsfield or any of the other 29 towns in one city. As Andrea has discussed, you know, over the last 4 years, systemic change has to happen. Personally, I'll say it on the record, I believe we're fortunate we have a district attorney who's made these efforts to reduce any of these discriminatory prosecutorial practices, but that's not my wheelhouse. So, you know, what I can speak about on this is over the last 3 years, I received 2 cultural diversity awards, and really getting into, I think, brass tacks is what you said. Yeah, this has to do with my work as a cultural proficiency champion. And those awards had an audience of about 6,200 employees statewide. And so it was a good look statewide. I may have been the only Berkshire County person or one of very select few that received them. And what that had to do was working as they call it the CPC acronym, Cultural Proficiency Champion. And that was working in courthouses across the state, really opening up the transparency when people of color had legal issues about where they could go for resources, and not hiding the resources, and in fact overly advertising this is somebody you can come to. In Great Barrington, I'm on a leave currently, as you may know. We made a point when I started these efforts around 6 years ago, I believe, to post my name, title, personal cell phone number across the courthouse. So anybody that has any issues doesn't have to segue through that proverbial administrative red tape, and they can contact me directly. My chief probation officer term as president. And by the way, do we have time limits on these, Gwendolyn?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay.
5 seconds.
And is there a clock? I apologize. Am I looking at a clock here?
No, but
No, okay. If someone's talking, I can't hear. But
are you finished? You can take the time that you took to check in on the time, about 30 seconds to finish up.
okay, thank you. So basically, for the past 8 years, I stepped down in May of this past year as Chief Probation Officer Association president. And during that time, I accelerated our minority representation from 28 to 69%. And I spent a lot of time doing it. And currently I left off where we now have Black, Latino, and Asian representation. That didn't happen by mystery. It involved reaching out across the state, empowering these leaders, and letting them know that we needed their services. And that has a ripple effect to the other 2,000 employees, and it's worked well. So again, I know that's a little rambling, Gwendolyn, but again, I'm not looking at any questions, so I'm hearing them for the first time right now. Thank you.
All right, I'm not quite sure about that, but check your email because I think we resent them to you.
Okay.
The third question here is about law enforcement in schools. So Andrea, your opponent, Tim Shagru, has talked about bringing the DA's office back into the schools with programs around anti-bullying. What is your opinion on that stance? What do you see the role of the DA's office in relation to education, and what would a positive impact look like in a partnership, a school partnership?
Yeah, I'm very proud of the work that my office has done to really bring the DA's office to the schools and the schools into the DA's office. I see that relationship as being critical. So we have started a juvenile justice initiative that includes people that work with young people from across the county that advise my office on the work that we do with youth and around our diversion program in particular. So diversion is where, instead of addressing the needs of young people in the court system, we work with community-based organizations to address their needs. We have robust partnerships with cultural organizations, nonprofits, mental health organizations from across the county to provide those services. We have done some great programming in the schools. We do a program with the U.S. Attorney's Office on internet safety that we feel has been very effective. We have our Youth Advisory Board, which we have completely overhauled to turn into like a social justice organization. We work with the ADL, training them with the World of Difference campaign training. So they're actually trained to be mentors to other students in their high school around standing up to hate and bias. We were invited to the ADL annual conference that they have, the Women of Valor Award, and one of our students spoke at the Women of Valor presentation in front of 300 people that were there to observe the ADL celebration. And we've done work, we've gotten grant funding from the Department of Probation to provide social emotional learning in school. We see that as a pilot program that we would love to have expanded. The prior administration did something that was very unusual in that they taught these specific life skills programs. They employed about 5 people. They spent over $350,000 a year on this program. No other office in the state provides this, and it was the entirety of the community outreach that we wouldn't be able to do anything else. I don't see it the role of the DA's office to provide direct service, but to help organize the community around big issues like anti-bullying.
Thank you. And so, Alf, again, if you don't have these, what would you imagine a positive impact in a school partnership between the sheriff's office and the school? What would be a positive outcome if you were to be in a partnership with the school? JV, the sound. Alf, can you hold? We're not hearing you.
So, okay, you want me to, I'll mute myself. I got you. So basically, as
2
a
minutes.
sheriff, my job is care and custody. I don't have a lot of effect on schools, but as a previous City of Pittsfield School Committee member, obviously I'm pretty well versed in that. I implemented and was responsible for funding for the Juvenile Resource Center, which is basically a diversionary program in effect that hopefully we don't have these young men and women later on have to actually be detained or incarcerated at the House of Correction. I also believe that we need for the sheriff's office something like a cadet program, and that's for community outreach where we educate the community about the role of the sheriff's office and all the opportunities employment wise there. And we try to encourage, especially communities, people of color, that, you know, these are worthwhile jobs. There's something that can serve you and your families throughout, you know, wonderful quality of life in Berkshire County. And we try to push more individuals into those careers. And that solves a lot of different issues for sure. How's my time?
50 seconds.
Can you rephrase the question again, Glenn?
This is more of an imagined question for you of what would a positive impact be if the sheriff's department and the school were in partnership?
Yeah, so I could also see deputies going into the schools, obviously. I could see that on educational initiatives beside what I just talked about with some type of cadet program trying to recruit from a younger age. And I could also see a little offshoot of this, but regarding the Morningside property, which is next to one of our elementary schools, we would shutter that property, not the programming, and return that building and those grounds to the community. And we'd have a steering committee, a municipal City of Pittsfield, DCAM state, and decide how it's best to be used, but definitely not for correctional purposes or programming anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last group question before I focus on the DA is, it's pretty standard practice to deny that candidates have made mistakes or to kind of sidestep mistakes. What we're asking you to do is to reflect on a time when you generally missed an opportunity, generally made a professional error in and around racial justice and equity work.
Is this for me?
It's first for DA Harrington and then next for you.
So we have worked very hard to improve the diversity of the staff in the district attorney's office, and we've had success with that. If you look at the percentages in terms of Berkshire County as a whole, Berkshire County is 86% white. We compare that to the percentage in the office, which is about 76% white. So, you know, we don't have old statistics to compare to, but we can compare ourselves to the population of Berkshire County. So our diversity is better than what we see here in Berkshire County in the general population. But what I found as a manager is that recruiting a diverse staff is really just the first step, and it's the smaller step. Really, it's working on creating a culture of inclusion within the office and working on retention. I think that was something that I'm a lot savvier to now than I was when I first started in this position. And we have worked with some really great experts in terms of how do we ensure that our workplace is both, you know, inclusive and equitable, but that's ongoing work all the time that we all, you know, have to be diligent at. And, you know, we definitely have, you know, had some missteps in the office in terms of ensuring that people feel like they're being treated equitably and that we're inclusive.
It's your 2 minutes, Alf.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. So, yeah, I made a lot of mistakes probably throughout my career. It's been a 30+ year career, but probably the number one thing is the human service issue. Sometimes I've been known, if we have an employee that's not performing after multiple chances and trainings and retrainings, things of that nature, to carry that employee, continue it, because, you know, we have empathy in life, obviously, and you never want to see somebody be separated from their employment, especially in government and bureaucracy. It's a tough road with unions and things of that nature. However, that's definitely a mistake I've made where I haven't cut the cord soon enough where it's adversely affected the office, and that's not fair to other employees as well. That's what it gets down to. So there's a saying, it's called attrition by subtraction. Sometimes you lose somebody, and actually you can, it's like pulling weeds out of a garden. You pull the weeds out and the roses blossom, but that's a tough thing to do. So in the business I'm in, you get some managers that I call it the silo effect. As long as the building is not burning to the ground, they don't want to be bothered because it's just not worth it with union battles and negative scrutiny and turmoil in the workplace. But that's something I learned eventually in my career. That's not what you get paid for as a public servant. You get paid to make the hard choices. You need to make them, and you need to make them forthwith. So to wrap this up, I wish I had come upon that expertise a little bit sooner in my career than later on. But at the end of the day, I've gotten there, so I feel I'm an effective manager. On those rare occasions, I know how to take care of it, and unfortunately create a better team with less people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So for now, Alf, we're gonna mute you and we're gonna talk to DA Harrington. We have a few questions. These came from our race task force collectively. The first one is still reflecting on the loss of Miguel Estrella. One of the major topics that has come up has been mental health in the police response. So you've expressed support in past bridge meetings for removing police from mental health crisis response. What is your position and what needs to happen for that to become a reality? What can your office realistically impact? A DA has a lot of power, and yes, community partnerships are necessary, but what can your office actualize?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And first, I want to express my condolences to the Estrella family and to the community who was so impacted by this horrible tragedy. And the reality is that the young people who were trying to help Miguel were looking for medical help. They were looking for an ambulance. He was indicated that he was feeling suicidal, and they were looking for help from a medical response. So this is a tough case for my office. It's a tough case for the city of Pittsfield and for the community at large. What I found is, as I said earlier, I really can have the biggest impact on the things that I control. I wanted this investigation to be such that it could inform a community discussion around how do we all unpack this, look at what went wrong, and how can we improve as a community moving forward. And that takes people from all different parts of our community. It takes the people that from the mental health community, it takes people from the city, from our state legislators, from the DA's office, to really dig into these issues and find better solutions. And definitely we need to have more non-law enforcement options for responding to mental health crises. We need to have options that include law enforcement in situations that potentially could turn dangerous. But I wanted to provide an investigation that was so thorough that people had the facts of this case that could inform us moving forward. Because it really is up to the city in terms of how they control their police department and how they're going to respond to mental health. We, working with Alina Estrella, she's very committed to making change in her brother's name. We want to support her with that. We've started having conversations in the West Side and with public health around what kind of programs can we do to provide culturally competent mental health services in the West Side.
Thank you. The next question is for you too.
Oh, okay.
This is on data transparency. You referenced your project with Duke. I mentioned our conversations over the last few years. We've had a few forums with what a difference a DA makes. How much closer are we to understanding racial disparities in prosecution, in dangerousness holds, in sentencing than we were 4 years ago? What progress has been made and what still needs to be done?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm proud of the progress that we made in terms of we collected very detailed information on every case we resolved by way of plea in district court and in superior court, and have given it to world-class researchers. We're the only office in the entire country that has been able to accomplish that goal. We will be working with them on recommendations and looking at areas for growth and places where we're having challenges. I feel that we are very close to getting those kinds of answers and to working on real solutions that are going to inform offices from all over the country. In terms of pretrial detention, you know, there was a study done by Mass Inc. from, I think it was from 2015, I want to say, that found that Black people were being charged 5 times higher median bail in Central Berkshire District Court than white people. We know that the cash bail system, it's unfair, it's racist, it's un-American. Holding people pretrial because they can't afford money is, it's a travesty. And I represented people that were directly impacted by this, and I vowed to change that system. I do believe that it is very important for people to be safe and to feel safe. I think it is very important for us to have a dangerousness statute that allows us to ask judges to hold people who have engaged in behavior that is very dangerous. I mean, all of these cases are people that have committed serious sexual assaults, strangulation, shootings. You could read any one of these police reports and you would 100% understand why we requested that they be held. But with the 58A, there's very strong due process. We have a hearing, we have to present evidence. Ultimately, a judge makes the determination. We absolutely, as a state, need to do a lot of work around pretrial detention and looking at best practices. I've been working with the Department of Probation, Pamerson Eiffel. They're working on looking at how do we better screen cases pretrial to make sure that we're making good decisions and that we're looking at race and equity.
Thank you. So we have 2 more questions for you directly. At a recent debate, you and Tim talked about moving away from cash bail and the benefits and drawbacks of dangerous hearings and pretrial detention. What is your stance on these issues? You've been talking about this.
Yeah.
And what have you and your office learned in the last 4 years? So is there anything to add on to what you just shared?
What we've learned in the last 4 years. You know, people have very emotional responses to the kinds of decisions that we make in the district attorney's office, and they really run the gamut. And you know, I think the big challenge and why I love What a Difference a DA Makes is that it educates people about what actually happens, you know, who in the system plays what role. I think people assume that whatever happens the first time you step into court is the resolution of the case. They don't understand that that's just a pretrial situation and that a case that's not an actual disposition. I think what I've learned big picture overall is that we need to be educating people about what we do, and we also need to be looking at data and implementing best practices, and we need to, you know, keep engaging with the community in discussing these issues. I did think that I would be able to rely a little bit more on lay activists than we can. What I found is that, you know, Bridge, even NAACP, there's so much going on. People are tapped out, and it's really up to me to figure these things out. And I want to be in dialogue, but it's not fair to expect non-lawyers, non-prosecutors to come up with these solutions. It's my responsibility.
Thank you. And the last one, maybe the toughest one, I think, if people that know me in this work feel like we have to talk about what's really around us. And so there's been a lot of critique regarding your professional efficacy and your preparedness to be in this role. And I just think that it's important for you to address it directly.
Okay, yeah. So, you know, when I started this role 3.5 years ago, one of the things that really struck me was how prepared I was. I think my experience doing post-conviction death penalty appeals was critical around conviction integrity. When I went to a homicide, I knew what I was looking for. I knew that I was there to make sure that the police were not rushing to judgment, that we were looking at all different possibilities, that we were using competent evidence, that we were reaching out to victims and to building those relationships with victims and to witnesses right away so that people feel supported and so that victims will share information with us about our cases. And my experience, representing indigent criminal defendants in appeals and in trial matters was exactly the kind of training that I needed to bring the kinds of change that I wanted to bring as the district attorney. We have done great work on big issues. We are cutting edge in the nation in terms of how we're looking at racial disparities, how we're prosecuting gender-based violence like no DA's office in Berkshire County has ever done, how we're looking at implementing harm reduction into the decisions that we make. And we've had incredible success in the advocacy that we do every day on our cases. Trials shut down because of COVID. And once we were able to resume, we had the biggest run of trials in Berkshire County. It's unparalleled compared to any other administration. And we've had huge successes. I think the bigger thing for me is just that I underestimated how resistant to change the different sectors of the criminal legal system have been. And I'm subject to a level of scrutiny that my predecessors, it's just off the charts. It is nothing like what we've ever seen in Berkshire County before. And all of these controversies are made up controversies because they can't hit me for my policies and they can't hit me for the good work of my office.
Thank you. So thank you for that. I think we're going to, you can have a seat for a moment. And we're going to switch back to Alf. And Alf, have you found your questions yet? Do you have them in front of you? JV, can you unmute?
No, but I'm not concerned at this point, Gwendolyn. Just let me know what they are.
All right. Okay, so the first one, so I heard Andrea referred herself as the chief law enforcement officer, but in my preparation on the history of sheriffs, they said that that was the role of the sheriff. So for all intents and purposes, the sheriff is one of the chief law enforcement officers elected by the people to protect the rights of the people. How do you see the impact of racism from that vantage point? If your role is really there to protect the rights of the people?
Yeah, I mean, the solutions to racism is what I would say. So the chief law enforcement officer is the district attorney, but obviously the sheriff has an important role to play. And the number one thing is working with the district attorney. So I don't know why it's evolved this way, but I definitely have the ability to work with any district attorney, including Andrea. For some reason, the current sheriff, I don't know what the issue is, but doesn't appear to be amenable to wanting to work with Andrea, only her opponent, Tim. So that's the first thing that we, have in contrast, my opponent and myself. I think the solutions are, A, we get many more people of color in rank and file positions at the sheriff's office. And that's not really hard. Like I said, that's outreach. Those are cadet programs. That's a comfort factor, but you have to do some work on it. It just doesn't come here organically. Secondly, we have legitimate promotional opportunities. Right now, there's no scoring system in place whatsoever. That's just ripe for best case scenario, not equitable treatment, worst case scenario, fraudulent activity. So we take care of that. Thirdly, our executive leadership team at the sheriff's office, in 10 and a half, almost 11 years, it's accelerated from 8 to 14 individuals. And that's troubling in itself because over the past decade, the workload has decreased by more than 50%. But unfortunately, on top of that, it's all white individuals. So as I've said before, statistically, in 2022 in America, that's almost an impossibility, but unfortunately here it's not. So that team of leaders at the sheriff's office does not represent the rank and file, and they surely don't represent the 2 cities and 30 communities in Berkshire County. So those are things that we would address immediately. We have a good action plan about how to resolve, and we look forward to doing so. Thank you.
So I'm going to follow up because my next question you already answered about your awards. So I'm going to follow this one up a little bit with okay, so that we know the demographics have not been what they need to be. So what racism do you see from that? So again, focusing on like when you recruit, what is it that you're recruiting for? Why? What will change? What will shift?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is we're going to have to switch the outreach. That's I think you said switch or change.
What will shift? What will
Shift. Yeah. So that will shift. There appears to be a high level of apathy there for accepting those type of results. You know, more recently, forget the executive leadership team, over the last 6 years, 7 years, there's been at least 4 external promotions to rank of captain, and some may be not familiar with the paramilitary structure, but captain's an important position in those facilities. And unbelievably, again, part and parcel with what I just spoke about, all 4 of those are white males. So it's been allowed to organically grow like that. I think some individuals inside aren't complicit with this. They just don't know any better because they haven't seen anything differently. And we need to pull back that curtain, which we have over the last 80 days, and blast in a massive effort of sunlight to really say, hey, this is not acceptable behavior. We're showing it statistically in the employment makeup here, and we're going to change it. And it's about, number one, Gwendolyn, caring enough to do it. And number 2, having a team that has the tools at hand to affecting those results.
I'm going to ask one more time. And how will that change the lives of Black and brown communities in relation to law enforcement?
Yeah, so a couple different ways. When you have a good product at the sheriff's office, number one, you have inmates coming out and they're equipped to retain employment. It's as simple as that. So they're not involved in new crimes, especially violent crimes. And as some may know on this meeting, unfortunately and unbelievably, Berkshire County has the top two of the top 10 cities in all the state for violent crime per capita, for sure. We're smaller, but that's outrageous. So that's how it directly impacts the quality of life for people of color and people of non-color in the community, is by our inmates coming out and being productive members of society. Secondly, you have women. That's why I'm 100% in favor of Andrea's bail reform. You have women coming out that were arrested in lieu of $40 are getting shipped out of this county to Hampden County. These aren't even people that have been convicted of a crime. And I would suggest, I don't have the statistics here because, as you can imagine, the current sheriff's not cooperating with us on any effort when it comes to statistics. But this directly impacts people of color as well, especially on the women's side of the coin. So, for those reasons, those are things that we feel we can tackle and help with the quality of life. I guess third, I would say, getting back to the jobs, this is a massive employer in Berkshire County, to almost 250 person organization with a $20 million budget. I think it's 3 times the size of Andrea's, just to give you a little perspective about all the great work she does. So this has direct impacts on people of color in the community when they have good jobs, actually good state jobs that can have a ripple effect on their entire family's quality of life. So that's something we're cognitive as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'm going to read out my questions, but I feel like you covered them either earlier or just now. So I'll just read these and then you can see if there's anything you want to fill in. Again, in my research, I don't know much about sheriff's role. So to be honest, I was doing a lot of reading. I see the sheriff's role in my research as being jail administration, court duty, and law enforcement. Building on the opening question, I was going to ask for specific examples of how you'll build more racial equity and justice. And what I'm hearing is a lot in who's employed and like allowing the process to go from there. But if you have more to fill in, that would be great. The next question is, you've made it a centerpiece of your campaign to move incarcerated women back from Chicopee to local lockup. What impact would this have on the women who've been incarcerated? And then the second question you answered about demographics, you don't really have a sense of what that is at the moment. And let's see, what was the last piece? How do you have a sense of the needs of incarcerated women, and how do the voices of incarcerated women figure into your planning? I think we'll pause on that one for a moment. Yes, he talked to me.
Gwendolyn,
I hear you. So did
All
you
right,
hear
yeah.
that last question? There were a lot of those that I read you've touched on, but this last one, what do you understand about what incarcerated women themselves want, and how do those voices of incarcerated women figure into your planning?
yes, let me start at the beginning. I couldn't interrupt you as we were going on. So, yeah, I disagree about the law enforcement aspect of the sheriff's position. It's a care and custody position strictly, in my opinion. And that's really a issue with this campaign. So I come from treatment, restorative justice, and that's pretty well known. And the sheriff currently, he comes from law enforcement, and that's not a bad thing. It is what it is. But the care and custody is basic. Care and custody, inversely, custody, if you're incarcerated or detained, you should not be escaping. It's as simple as that. That's what we get paid to do. So that's a huge goal and effort on our team's behalf. And that's something we feel we can do a lot better. The care issue is when you come into the facility or facilities where it may be, you should leave at least as good as a detainee as you came in. And if you're an inmate, you better leave a lot better. That's our charge. And that's not happened either. We've had a number of deaths, unfortunately. So again, a basic tenet about what this job entails. So I want to get that out there regarding the care and custody versus law enforcement aspect. The second, can you just tell me what the second one was before we get to that final one?
It was looking again for examples of how you would build more racial equity and justice into your roles, but I think we talked about that.
Yep. Okay.
And then the last one was about women and how you're integrating the experience of incarcerated women into the decisions that you're making.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, just kind of a wider latitude here, and then I'll dial into the Chicopee situation. You know, staffing at Berkshire County House of Corrections become very top heavy. I spoke a little bit about the executive leadership team. We've also identified up to almost a dozen employees who've never stepped foot at the Cheshire Road facility. So we'd be eager to repurpose these men and women to do some good work at that facility. We also think it's important. We know we have enough money to accomplish what we've said in this campaign, but we also think it's important to establish a grant writer, you know, to work with different agencies. I'm familiar with SAMHSA in particular. The last grant writer I'm aware of was over, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. So that seems like something that's perhaps deficient when it comes to trying to garner some funds that would be helpful for all treatment portions. Anybody getting back to Chicopee regarding women, I heard the sheriff say something to the effect of he went down to Chicopee, spoke to a woman or woman, I'm not positive, and they said they love the resources down there. I'm going to always assume what he's telling is, assuming it's truthful. However, I think it wasn't really a fully developed response. It was a little bit, you know, political smoke and mirrors, because I feel very comfortable if that had been followed up with, hey, we have the same level of services in Berkshire County, perhaps if not better, do you still want to stay in Chicopee? I know the answer would be no, because we've had a number of people reach out to us as well that are ex-women inmates. So that's something that I wish, you know, he was able to talk about a little bit more. But I think that I'm not sure why Tom and his team are not equipped to do these changes. I don't know if it's a choice.
I'm going to remind you, just the rules are about your perspective and less.
Okay, my perspective. So let me rephrase it. I don't know why they haven't made these changes. I don't know why, but I know that we find it unacceptable, and separate but equal is not equal. And, you know, again, I'm going to assume the services in Chicopee are good. But like I said, we have services here that can be as good, if not better. And I think that here in Berkshire County is important. These women have family, jobs, social services, friends, established relationships, access to justice with hearings that are local, medical services for sure. And I know we can affect this. I know we can start on January 4th. And the bonus too, Gwendolyn, is this. The bonus is when we do this, we're going to create some wonderful job opportunities for members of our community as well. So in our opinion, it's just a win-win and a win. Thank you.
All right. the last question can be for both of you. Looking, and you touched on it, restorative justice, but what are alternatives to incarceration that you see? And so Alf, if you can answer, and then we'll go to DA Harrington for your last question. Alternatives to incarceration. JD, how come it's getting muted?
There we go. So yeah, again, that's mostly in the district attorney's wheelhouse, diversionary programming. But I'm 100% proponent of that in my probation job. We huge advocacy for that. But what we would do to companion that is certain inmates do not need to be locked up in the correctional facility in Cheshire Road. That's a fact. So that's a classification issue and classification problem. When you don't have staff that, for whatever reason, again, is equipped to make these decisions, people are just warehousing that facility. We would immediately use the Pittsfield Community Justice Program on 4th Street in Pittsfield. And in fact, we would also use the 2nd Street facility until we get to that place where we have it converted to something else, maybe mixed residential units. We'd have that facility used for women as well as a step-down facility. And so again, not exactly on point with diversion, but part and parcel with it, where it's more of a, it's not a conviction, nor are you spending time at the house of correction. It's somewhere in between you hopefully re-entering and being a productive member on the next chapter of your real life. Thank you.
Yeah. And DA Harrington.
Yeah, so we did a data presentation where we were able to show that we have reduced the number of people from Berkshire County going to state prison and going to the Berkshire County House of Correction through the policies that we are following in the district attorney's office. We really look to reserve incarceration for individuals who are predatory and who present a danger and a risk to the people here in our community. And we've had a significant impact. We have impacted thousands of people here in Berkshire County by keeping them out of the criminal legal system or minimizing their interaction with the criminal legal system. The way that we do that is we look for opportunities for people to receive services in the community, whether that's through a pretrial diversion program with a community justice center or potentially the drug court. I think that other things that our community can do to further reduce incarceration is to better address the needs of people with mental health issues and to better address the needs of people who are struggling with poverty. And it's happening. The community is getting into alignment. Pittsfield and North Adams both have a hub program where we can identify people that are kind of high need individuals and provide interventions before they start having interactions with law enforcement, building up our harm reduction services, building up our mental health services. It's the social determinants of health that improving those together that is really going to further reduce the numbers of people that are incarcerated.
No, I think that's good. I'm stepping out of my role for just 1 second, that hearing some of the things you just talked about, the partnerships with communities and trusting that communities know how to heal themselves and take care of themselves, I think is really important, as well as what Alf mentioned of restorative justice and practices. And I think from Bridget's standpoint for a moment, it would be really great to be able to be in partnership with other community partners, really working towards how do we support that, support communities taking care of themselves, right? And then also being able to work on restorative justice and practices as a full integrated wraparound program. So those are things that I'm hoping in the next 4 years we can actually figure out how to put resources together for that. So at this point, thank you both for fielding the questions directed at the both of you. Again, these questions went out, or will go out if things got lost, to everyone. I think that everyone has them, and we will send them to everybody that's attended today and everyone that's online, along with this recording. And also, now we're going to shift to you all, both online and also here for your questions. So if you have questions in here, if you would pass them to Stephanie. And then we actually have our first one from JV, and this is from Kumar for DA Harrington. What role, if any, does your office play in assisting the community partners you rely on for juvenile diversion programming to develop racial equity analysis? For example, does your office track outcomes for youth of color during your programs? Does your office track outcomes for youth of color who are in your in such programs?
So we definitely have a lot of work to do in the area of data tracking. We don't have the systems currently in place that we need to do that. When I went out looking for a data partner, I found Duke that was interested in the plea tracker. We are working statewide, all of the district attorney's offices to fulfill the requirements of the 2018 Criminal Justice Reform Act. We're advocating, we need new software basically for our offices in order to be able to track that kind of data. So this is a huge imperative. It's a big priority for us, and we need resources from the state. We've been advocating for the legislature to help us implement new systems so that we can do a better job of tracking those kinds of pieces of data. And that's the goal behind having a formal juvenile diversion program, because what used to happen before we had a formal program is, you know, Lennox had their program and different kids, but it wasn't being applied uniformly across the entire county. And we do very much have a uniform approach now so that all kids throughout the county have the same opportunities for diversion.
Thank you. Stephanie, do you have a question?
The question is, what can the DA and sheriff offices do to detect and remove extremists and supremacist persons from our law enforcement community? What can you do?
I can take that first. Thank you for the question. In my office, we did adopt a formal Brady policy, and we have asked the local police chiefs to proactively report officers who exhibit biased policing and who exhibit untruthfulness. We have received information of this kind. We do consider it, and you know, we will put officers on a Brady list, which means that we have to disclose that information to the defense. I'm on the U.S. Attorney's Office Civil Rights Task Force. I'm the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Committee. Gwendolyn is on the task force on the community outreach side. There's a victim advocate in my office who's also part of the U.S. Attorney's Office Task Force. We recently put on a training for 130 civil rights officers from all across the state on addressing civil rights, hate crimes, and bias. The biggest tool that I have, though, to have any kind of, you know, bearing over individual police officers is around using our Brady list, prosecuting police officers for crimes. When we see concerning police reports, you know, if we can't necessarily act on them under those two categories, we bring them to the attention of the police chiefs and we have frank and honest conversations. But I think that we're going to be doing more of that in the next term and potentially some more formal type programming.
Oh, Alf, do you have a response? Just take the pause.
Thank you. So I do. That's actually a great question. So corrections a little differently. This has been known to happen in DLC and HOC facilities federally and state, where staff can be indoctrinated with some of this extremist ideologies. So what you do is you have a reasonably robust internal affairs type of division, and you monitor that type of behavior. And that also includes monitoring social media activities from the employees. And if you see something that, you know, may be going in the wrong direction, you take action. Thank you.
Thank you. JV and Samel, you'll let us know if there's another question. Stephanie has a few more here.
Body cameras are favored by a majority of Massachusetts police chiefs, but few departments have implemented them, including Pittsfield. How does the DA office deal with a lack of video evidence in the era following the death of George Floyd?
Well, I'm a proponent of body cams. We do receive some body cam and dash cam footage from some of the local police departments. It's incredibly helpful. Certainly in the Estrella investigation, we had some surveillance, but body cam footage would have been even more helpful, and we could have gotten some more answers to the community faster than we were able to do so. You know, I don't control the Pittsfield Police Department, but they understand my position and my preference. It's hugely important evidence that as a prosecutor, we want to have. And, you know, I think it's incumbent upon the city to find a way to implement the body cams. It's a very important tool for us.
Alpha's up next.
I think there's also applications in corrections as well for footage like that and technology. So that's something I've been a proponent of as well, including what they call forced cell movements. So at the end of the day, everybody knows what happened from A to Z and take action appropriately. Thank you.
Given the unbelievable and overwhelming need for mental health care for the entire population, how do you envision increasing the non-law enforcement staff to address these issues in law enforcement? It's for Andrea.
Okay, I'm sorry, can you start, say that again?
Given the unbelievable and overwhelming need for mental health care for the entire population, how do you envision increasing the non-law enforcement staff to address these issues?
Well, you know, we have done some work with community-based organizations to make mental health services available to victims of crime. We primarily work with the victims. It's the defense side that works with the defendants, but we have partnerships with CSO, the Green Center, to provide mental health care to victims, and we refer victims to those programs. We have created incentives for the defense side to take advantage of mental health or substance use disorder through our diversion program. This is something new that didn't exist before I took office. Was, you know, if an individual gets mental health treatment or gets substance use disorder treatment, we will consider that when we are making recommendations to judges on how to dispose of their cases. We have applied for grant funding for different kinds of programming. We haven't been successful in securing those funds, but we are right now currently talking with the Green Center to provide recovery coaches that would actually be in the courtrooms and would be able to serve anybody that comes into the court. We've been talking with probation about starting a pilot program so that when people come into the courts, they can get signed up for mass health, whether they're defendants or victims. So, I mean, I guess overall, I see the most effective way for me to encourage people to get mental health treatment is really to make those community partnerships and to help form pathways for people that are both on the defense side and on the victim side of cases to get help. And we look at that favorably when we're disposing of cases.
Thank you. So I have a question here before I go back to Stephanie. So there was a question. Oh, Al, thank you.
Thank you. I know you can't hear me, so appreciate you.
It's okay. I skipped you because they directed that question.
I know.
To Andy, but would you like to respond?
Well, I'm on a roll, so I figured I'd add on to this too. Yeah, regarding for me regarding mental health clinicians, that's something we would participate in from the sheriff's office. We obviously saw the tragic death of Miguel Estrella, and we know that Pittsville PD had mental health specialists, but they weren't available during that interaction. So I'm obviously not second guessing what happened that day. I had the opportunity to watch most of Andrea's press conference. As I think I've said previously in a debate, I thought it was well done from A to Z, in my humble opinion. But I think it's critical to send these mental health specialists to deal with these emergency situations. And most police officers would like that at the end of the day. I know we can save lives if we do. There's national statistics. These experts have been recognized to have massive benefits on the scene with their mental health skill sets. And they've had years and years of dealing with this type of behavior where perhaps police officers haven't. So the bottom line from us is part of our budget, as I always say, it's going to be inmate rehabilitation mostly. But on this community outreach, we will have people on staff that can assist the community with these types of interactions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump into this before I go pass back to Stephanie, but here's a question I'm going to reframe a little bit is around racial justice training. So what do you see the value of having racial bias, racial justice training in the sheriff's department?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think one of the staples of the trainings that I would mandate are implicit bias trainings, and that's an eye opener for many in the community and in employment areas like this. And they're uncomfortable for sure, and there's reasons for that, but those are the conversations that need to happen. And I don't believe in the current academy. There's about 14 individuals coming out shortly that implicit bias is one of the curriculum provisions in the academy. So if I'm accurate about that, that's something we would supplement additionally and bring in those experts. There's a company we've done business with before called Maybright, and they've been a resource on some LGBTQ plus I trainings, but they may have some ability to steer us in the right direction for these segments as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the next one. We spoke once about restorative justice, and you indicated you are in favor of it. Why can't such a program be under the auspices of the DA's office?
Yeah, so I see restorative justice as a game changer. Very much want to have a restorative justice program here in Berkshire County. We have studied a number of models from across the country, and the best models are where the actual services are provided by community-based service providers. We're prosecutors. If we hear information in the course of restorative justice program, we have an obligation to act upon it. I don't think that we would have the right kind of level of trust with the defense bar in particular. If we were actually operating restorative justice programs ourselves, we want to refer cases to community-based providers in a non-law enforcement context to provide these services. Those are the kinds of programs that we've researched and studied that have been very effective. I see restorative justice as playing a role at different levels kind of the system. You know, certainly we've done some with juveniles, you know, certainly a lot of opportunity with low-level offenses. But one of the first things I did when I became the DA was I wanted to do a parole hearing. And so you know, you could, if you try to design a system to torture victims of crime, you couldn't come up with something better. So we made restorative justice as well for victims of serious crime, people that are incarcerated for long sentences as well. We need it at all different levels, and that requires a lot of expertise. And the district attorney's office is just not, we're just not in the right position to build those relationships of trust and to provide that kind of programming. I don't see us as being effective in providing direct services that really is just not our role, but we want to help the community organize around bringing these programs, and we want to refer people. And the programs that we really love, police can refer to restorative justice programs, and you don't even have to charge people, arraign people. There's like a lot of great kind of real downstream programs that wouldn't involve my office at all.
Thank you.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. You'll know. We have just a couple more and then we're gonna wrap up.
This is for you, Alf. How do you envision ensuring equitable treatment of all incarcerated folks?
Yeah, well, obviously that's critical. And I always say good policy development and rollout starts the conversation here. So it also goes hand in hand with training as well. So when you have a staff that's trained effectively, and we just talked about one of the components, the implicit bias. When they're trained effectively and they have the tools that they're supposed to have, more often than not, you're going to have the good results. When you have a staff that's not trained appropriately, that's when you're going to have issues with lawsuits and things of that nature. So you also need, you being me, need to lead by example, and as a leader in that agency, about what's tolerable and what's not tolerable. Anywhere from, actual actions on the floor in the pods to conversations that are allowed to transpire that may be inappropriate for certain types of people. You can't tolerate it. It's a slippery slope. You have to nip it in the bud immediately and set the tone on what a professional organization looks like. And you need a team around you that embodies that type of philosophy and leadership tenacity. Thank you.
Thank you. So here's a question from Lucy for Andrea. Can we please set up a program to have a 24-hour rapid response team member for mental health needs? Train community supports throughout the county, train the trainer type programs.
Well, I think that's essential. I think it's critical to public safety and to address the crisis mental health situations that we see. The city of Pittsfield and city of North Adams and Great Barrington do have some of those co-responders, but they're not available enough at the time. I definitely support those efforts and will advocate for them in any way that I can. I think that's a question for our state legislators to provide funding and to provide those kinds of programming. And for us in a rural community in particular, and I'm a countywide office holder, I want to see these resources throughout the entire county. I have seen the model in Texas. Texas actually does rural stuff really well. And there in the state of Texas, the sheriff's offices actually operate those kinds of programs. We need a countywide availability and countywide response. It's challenging because we don't have countywide government, but certainly an advocate for that. And, if that's something the sheriff's office could operate, I think that it's something that's worth looking into because they're a countywide organization as well.
Thank you. And there's acknowledgement this is a racial justice forum, but there's a question of how your offices handle gender identity.
Yes, so we have adopted gender affirming pronouns in our communications, in our record keeping. I feel that we've set the standard in the court system and in the legal system for doing so. We have had cases where we have definitely been impacted and taken into account people's gender identities, which have been part of our decision-making in how we prosecute our cases. We use these risk assessments in our domestic violence cases. We have updated those questions to reflect LGBTQ and gender affirming questions so that we can ensure the safety of everybody in our community. I think it's a really important question, and I think the individual who asked that question, and we really have tried to be leaders in this area. I'm sure that there's more for us to do, and certainly happy to hear any suggestions from anybody as well.
Hi. So, as I was saying before, I've attended some trainings from Maybright Group, and if elected sheriff, I would make it a mandate with all staff. These trainings are really good. They provide an overview of concepts and terms, so people that are not familiar with this language can understand the diverse array of the LGBTQIA+ identities, the experiences, and the cultures. The ones I've gone to at least include all the components and the nuances and the differences between sexual orientation versus gender identity and versus gender expression. Some people aren't aware. Those are the three elements. Also, in this day and age, 2022, putting some real specificity, and again, it has to do with corrections as well. Some of these challenges on paying attention to transgender, including non-binary identities. Overall, just a learning experience as well. It digs into the mental health issues, the wellness, and also accessibility for people in this community, or more often than not, lack of accessibility. And again, this is inside facilities, lack of accessibility. And something that I've gotten out in the probation world, and I would carry over the corrections world, is best practices. When you start to create these respectful and supportive environments for people working in the criminal justice system, whether it's Andrea's office or on the street as a police officer. But for my statement here, it's inside corrections. That's really where the rubber hits the road here. So as I said, maybe earlier today, good and equitable policy rollout is the goal that often solves many issues on the front end. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we've touched, this is a race equity forum. We've talked about gender, incarcerated women. We've brought in this gender identity question and mental health, because no one is a single identity, right? So we have to think about how race intersects with socioeconomic status, with mental health issues, with gender and gender identity. So thank you. Stephanie has our last community question, and then we'll be wrapping up.
How do you go about choosing whom to prosecute as it relates to race? Are people of color prosecuted with higher frequency? How does the race of the victim influence your decisions of who to prosecute? Do cases where the victim is white ever receive higher priority in prosecution? Have you looked into this?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I know that we are prosecuting people of color at higher, disproportionately than we are prosecuting white people. I mean, that's true across the system. That's, I think, because of unconscious inherent bias in prosecutors, but also amongst witnesses and the police that are writing the police reports. It's a systemic problem. And I really appreciate the questioner asking about the race of victims. I don't think that's something that's talked about enough. I used to do post-conviction death penalty appeals. There was a very famous study of death penalty cases called the Baldus study that found that the race of a victim drove whether or not the defendant got the death penalty more than any other factor. So we're keenly aware of that. We have worked to address it by having a diverse staff, particularly with our victim witness advocate staff, doing training, doing DEI training, working on building relationships in vulnerable communities to build trust. We're getting data from Duke, and when we designed our questionnaires for the data that we're getting, I was very interested in getting data around victims, the race of the victim, the participation of the victims. What I've learned is that, you know, if you're looking at domestic violence in particular, white women tend to fear that the perpetrator is not going to be punished enough. Black women tend to fear that the perpetrator is going to be overly punished. So, you know, I believe in public safety. I believe my job is to do the work of public safety. And the only way we can do that is if we are addressing these racial justice issues, because we can't build trust in communities. They're not going to trust law. They're not going to report cases. They're not going to share information with us if we don't address the systemic racism in the system. So I know we're doing it. It's happening across the system. We're working on, you know, really be measuring that and keep working on how we stop doing it. One innovation that we've made is we stopped asking race-based jury selection questions. It used to be standard to ask potential jurors if they thought the system was unfair to Black people. We don't ask, of course the system's unfair to Black people. We all know that. We stopped asking those questions. And it's just an example of the kinds of interrogation we're doing and the innovation that we're making.
Thank you. I don't know what all that means right now, but it, to
Okay.
me, would be really interesting. And it's good that you stopped asking, no, just this one piece. But if you would start informing them how, because we can't assume that everybody knows how, right? I mean, you know, because you do the work, but I think that just the next step in that would be interesting to me. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I enjoyed listening to Andrea there. I do want to say, am I going to have a chance to speak before we wrap up, Gwendolyn, or is this it?
Yes, there's a whole ritual to closing up.
Okay,
So
cool.
we're ready to move into that now. So the first piece I want to address in the chat, it was again asked about representation here tonight. My race task force team, we're really working hard to try and find a date. It was complicated. This was a date that I guess some of the candidates said they couldn't make, and it ended up being the date we landed on. Again, what we're trying to do to address that is to have the same questions that you heard answered here tonight. We have them written already, but since we're going to distribute them, we want to go back again to people to see if they want to, what goes out in the world, if they want to do anything else with it. But you'll get those answers that they have prepared for this evening. The workaround that our team was trying to do today was not appealing to everybody, so we didn't feel like that was what we should do. We didn't get consent from everyone involved before we made that plan, and so that's why it got changed. So I just want that to be clear, and it just kind of needs to be what it is, right? Not everybody could be here today. The people that are here, you heard from the other people, you will get the written piece from, and then also the recording from today. And what Bridge hopes this does is really inform the rest of this campaign cycle, right? How people show up, the rest of the questions people ask, you know, what conversations are continued in the, I think there are 3 more debates to come, right? So this is just our part and hoping that we continue to inform the race equity conversations. I hope that all candidates, so whether it's representatives or the candidates that are here, work at continuing to develop fluency around race equity, answering the questions that we're asking, and actually really coming up with concrete solutions and innovative solutions to take us to the next step. So I hope that this again informs all the next steps. So that's what I wanted to say there. There are some closing questions, and these would, if you could keep these under a minute, there's 3 of them. But the first one, and I'll start with Alf on this, is what models of law enforcement inspire your work and your vision?
Yeah, so I'm not sure about models, but supervisors and bosses did. I had the pleasure of working for the state attorney general, Scott Harshbarger, for a year and change. And I learned a lot about how to run an office under his tutelage. Also, I had the pleasure of working currently for Commissioner Edward Dolan for the past 8 years, I believe, almost 9 years. And in my capacity as president of the association, his capacity as commissioner of probation, I saw a lot of cutting edge programming and funding he brought in to really propel the probation service to the next level. It's, as some may know, it's the oldest probation service in the country, perhaps the world. And it was fun to be part of that experience. So models, not per se, but supervisors and people I look up to, I had a front row seat on those adventures. And it's something I've always memorialized when the time is right for the take leadership of an agency like the Sheriff's Office to roll out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of mentors that have very much inspired me. When I was in law school, I studied with Angela Jordan Davis, who was my criminal law professor, and she did the early scholarship around how prosecutors were using their discretion and was leading to mass incarceration. And she planted a seed that we needed people who really cared about racial justice and social justice to be prosecutors. Also, I am inspired by Rasan Hall. I'm very excited that he's running in Plymouth. I have endorsed him, but hearing him speak around these issues, it just helps me imagine things to be different, because I think that's what we need to do. We need people that are not so embedded in the system that we can imagine a different way. I had the opportunity to visit Portugal and to see their approach to drug policy in particular. I have absolutely taken those ideas and brought them back here. I'm part of Fair and Just Prosecution, which is a group of reformer DAs from across the country. We share information and inspire each other, but I think the model is there's no model. We're making a new model.
That was a good segue into the next question, which is, what social innovations can you imagine? And Rasan Hall is the person that was working with us the last couple of years, and what a difference a DA makes. And remember, I said we have to go leave the What a Damn campaign to run. So that's who Andrea was just talking about. But that next question that we had here was, what social innovations can you imagine? And again, we're at a race equity forum, but if you were to imagine something new that would work, what would that be? 1 minute, and you'll hear the chimes. Yes.
If I could imagine something new, I mean, the restorative justice piece, I think, is new, and that's something that I think is the biggest game changer that we could bring. But I think, with having a new governor, we're going to have a Democratic governor. We're going to have a new attorney general too. I can imagine the system really being, a strong social safety net for people, so that right now it's like policing and law enforcement has taken the place of mental health services and therapeutic services and opportunity for people. So, I can imagine a Massachusetts where we're better addressing these issues in the public health system, where DAs and police are really dealing with people that are predatory and, getting people that don't really need to be in the criminal justice system into the public health system.
Yeah, I mean, on the social innovation front, for me, it's really specific to the inmates leaving the House of Correction in much better shape than they came in. And, as most people know, 98% of these men and women are coming back to our community in Berkshire County. They're going to be your neighbor, your colleague, your employer, your employee, things of that nature. And that's really what social innovation is about. It's about setting them up best light possible and allowing them to have all the success. And then our society is a direct recipient of that. So that's something, we'd be cognizant of for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is really the last question. I know people are beginning to float out. What will change look like under your leadership in 1 minute? So, Andrea.
Well, look, I mean, change is very difficult. There's a lot of resistance to change. And after George Floyd, things really opened up. And I really imagined that we were going to be able to get across the system addressing these issues. And there's this pushback against that now, and a lot of fear. We see a lot of fear out in the community. So, change for me under my leadership for the next 4 years, I'm going to have a renewed emphasis on the community, alignment, getting, everybody working together on these issues. My first term was very focused on the DA's office and what did I need to do to build a strong office, to get our policies into place, to make the changes within the office that we needed to make. My next goal is to really play a bigger role in the community on addressing these big issues.
And Alex, you'll have the final word this evening.
Yeah, so basically change for me is pretty delineated. Number one, as we talked about it numerous times, we will bring our women back to Berkshire County, starting with the detainees and then the inmates. Separate but equals not equal. That's the bottom line. Two, I'm going to run the tightest fiscal ship up there, at least in the past 12 years. No more $180,000 executives have take-home cars and gas cards. Just not happening anymore. Three, we are going to diversify the staff inside. We're going to be absolutely inclusive, people of color. They're going to have leadership opportunities from sergeants up, but most importantly, they're going to have an opportunity to really be at the head table when we are affecting policy. There's going to be people that represent other than Caucasian that will be making decisions as executive leadership team members. Four, we're going to close 2nd Street, the physical property. We're going to return that property to the neighborhood. They deserve it. They were promised. 5, we're going to have a regional lockup. We are going to maximize our resources up there and also follow through on promises that were made to these chiefs of police over 12 years ago. And lastly, I publicly announced it. I will self-impose 2-term limit maximum. These goals I just talked about right now, they're achievable, but different leadership's needed. If I'm elected, that's what's going to happen. And all of this also comes under one umbrella. It's called transparency. And when we're doing the job right, you're going to know about it. If we're not doing the job right, we're going to tell you. We're going to ask for some guidance, or we're going to say we're sorry. And if there's anything in between, the public will know about it. Transparency. Thank you.
All right. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Should also tend to your family. Thank you for being here. Thank you, DA Harrington, for being here. Thank you for the folks on Zoom and the representatives and delegates that came from both of the other candidates groups. Thank you all for being here in person. Thank you. So thank you very much. And again, sorry for any little idiosyncrasies, but thank you for being here.